So Reuben was the oldest. So in theory, he was supposed to have gotten, the best of the best because he's firstborn. However, since he had slept with one of his father's wives, concubines, I don't know. Hey guys, and welcome back to another True Thoughts Thursdays, where I'm taking you through all my random thoughts on this here faith journey. All right, so today we will be wrapping up our study on Joseph by finishing up chapters 48 through 50 in Genesis. So in 48, we have Jacob is coming to the end of his life, and he calls for Joseph's sons, the ones that were born to him in Egypt, Ephraim and Manasseh. I don't know how to say that for real, but that's what we're going with. And he wanted to bless them. So Joseph brings the kids to his father, and he begins telling him of how he heard from God himself about how prosperous and how his descendants would multiply and grow into all these nations and such. So one of the interesting things there is that at this point, Jacob is, super old and his vision was sketchy at best. So when Joseph presents the sons to him, he has Manasseh on his left, which would be Jacob's right, because he's the oldest. And then Ephraim was on Joseph's right, which would be Jacob's left, because he was younger. And it was in the expectation that Jacob would put his right hand on the eldest son's head, because he's the oldest, and culturally the oldest was supposed to get the birthright. But what Jacob ended up doing is he switched his hands over and put the right hand on Ephraim and the left on Manasseh. And so Joseph was kind of like, high key irritated, because he's like, excuse me, but that's the oldest. Like, he tried to move his hand and like switch it to what he was expecting or, wanting it to be. And Jacob actually told him, he was like, no, I'm right. This is what it's going to be. And so after that, it just looks like Joseph just accepted the fact that it was what it was, which no problem. So we get into 49, and this is where Jacob is giving his last words. When I tell you, he came for some of them kids' necks like nobody's business. And I actually had to look up some of these things, because I was like, why did he say it like that? And then when I got the context, it was like, oh, yeah, makes sense. So we have, starting with Reuben. So Reuben was the oldest. So in theory, he was supposed to have gotten, the best of the best because he's firstborn. However, since he had slept with one of his father's wives, concubines, I don't know, Blah, whatever you count her as. So he defiled his father's bed, basically. And so he says to him that, turbulent as water, you will not excel because you got into your father's bed and you defiled it. And it's like, oh. And I'm sure the siblings, like his brothers, knew about this, but also it was like, oof, yikes. Then he moves on to Simeon and Levi. And these two are grouped together and essentially, calls them deceitful and conniving, which is crazy also. And so what I found out is the reason that Jacob was taking on those older two sons of Joseph was that they were replacing some of his brothers they were getting the inheritance now instead of Reuben and Simeon. And with Levi, I believe they said like the Levites just never had like a set piece of land. They just had to live in like different cities and other people's territories, which is crazy work. But also, I mean, what you gonna do? You was out here wilding, and your daddy was like, yeah, nah, well, not blessing that. So to be fair, then we get to Judah. So Judah has the second longest blessing, second only to Joseph. It's the same amount of verses, like 5 verses each, but Judah has, I believe they said 55 words, and Joseph had 61. So not far off, but Judah gets a great shout out, and he leads with, Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the necks of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. It's like off rip. Like Judah was on the come up. And then, he continues on blessing him. And then we move forward. We get to Zebulun. His is all right. Issachar, his is all right. Dan, his was interesting. It was a little iffy, but not horrible. Gad, again, iffy, but not horrible. Asher had a good one. Naphtali had a good one. And then we get to Joseph. This man stayed the favorite child the entirety of his life, because the first thing he says to Joseph, similar to how immediately off rip for Judah, he's giving him like, your brothers will praise you. The very first thing he says about Joseph is a fruitful vine beside a spring. Its branches climb over the wall. Like, he just immediately goes into describing Joseph as not just a vine, but a fruitful one that is like growing and flourishing. And it's just like, man, you still playing favorites on your deathbed, and you crazy for that. But also, again, what you gonna do? And last but not least, Benjamin, the baby. And his is short, and his does sound a little bit like a low-key like diss, but then when I looked it up, it was explained a bit better. So for Benjamin, he said, Benjamin is a wolf. He tears his prey. In the morning, he devours the prey, and in the evening, he divides the plunder. So in the first part, it sounds like, he's kind of saying something negative about Benjamin, but really what it was is that it was being said of Benjamin, and the characteristics of that tribe would be, fierce fighters, but that also specifically with Benjamin, that not only did he take down the prey, but he also shared it amongst others. So he wasn't, selfish with it, is how I understood that. But he actually divided up his plunder with others. So after he goes through all the kids, he then commands them all, because I believe the last time he was only speaking to Joseph specifically, but this time he tells all of them that he wants to be buried back with his people. So with Abraham and Isaac and their wives, and where his first wife Leah was. While they were traveling, Rachel passed, and so wherever they were at that time is where she got buried. And yeah, so just Leah was over there with the ancestors and stuff. But he said to all of them, he's like, hey, no, but when I die, actual for real, take me back over there. So that takes us into chapter 50, that he passes, and Joseph is distraught, of course. And I'm sure the others were distraught too, but, again, the emphasis here is on Joseph. So do with that what you will. But one of the interesting things is that he had his father mummified, which was not traditionally a practice that they would have done. That was a very much so Egyptian practice. But in order for them to take him back and bury him where he wanted to be laid to rest, they had to do it. Like, they had to embalm him. But instead of it being who it usually was, which were like the priests, he had physicians do it. So in a way, even though this was like an Egyptian custom, he wasn't doing it as a part of Egyptian religion. Like, he wasn't trying to blend religions or just like, oh, well, for this one time we'll do it this way. It was literally like the functionality of the embalming and the mummification versus the spiritual or religious aspect of it that the Egyptians associated with it. When they left to bury him, they were gone for a brick. So it was like, 70 days? It was a long amount of time, a very long amount of time. And then we're going to fast forward to when Joseph is getting ready to pass. Actually, before we do that, when they were heading back, his brothers were like, oh shoot, our dad's gone. And Joseph might have only been letting us live because dad was still here. And so they sent a messenger. They didn't even go talk to him themselves. They sent a messenger to say to him that, oh, well, dad said before he died, like one of his dying wishes is, just forgive us. Like, don't hold nothing against us. And Joseph reiterates to them, because they do end up coming, and it is implied that, because he cried, because he's like, y'all, what? And so he tells them, he was like, okay, look, guys, like, you're good. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of your families. Like, don't worry about that. Because, and something he said to them before, he says it again, that even though, they did sell him off, what they meant for evil, what they meant for his destruction, God was already working that thing in order to save all the lives that were saved, because Joseph was in the position that he was appointed to in Egypt. So when we get to Joseph getting ready to pass, he calls his brothers to him, and it doesn't specify which ones. I am curious because he was good and over 100. He died at the age of 110. So he only had one younger brother. So somebody had to be over 110 if he's calling his brothers. So, but it doesn't say. But he says to them that, he's about to die, but God will certainly come to your aid and bring you up from this land to the land he swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so he made them all take an oath that when God comes to your aid, you are to carry my bones up from here. And then Joseph was also embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt, and there he stayed until Moses and them dipped out, and they took him with them, which was what he asked. So that is pretty much all the things. I will say, really looking at Joseph, all the things that he went through, if I take nothing else away from his story and his life, is that just because it doesn't look like what you want it to look like doesn't mean that God isn't working. It doesn't mean that he hasn't already provided for you. It doesn't mean that he hasn't already made a way where there seems to be no way. I get from Joseph to stay consistent, do what it is that you're supposed to do what it is that you're called to do, and don't worry about the rest. Because there were so many times that he could have really operated in the flesh and been out of pocket, but he didn't. And that, to me, again, like I've said before, speaks so highly of his integrity, of his character. And it makes sense that God blessed him the way he did, because he honored God the way he did. And he genuinely just seemed to be a good person that not only was kind, but also loved and feared God. So that is a wrap on our lessons from Joseph. I hope y'all enjoyed this little journey with me. I am looking forward to doing some more studies on different characters. There's a part of me that wants to do Jonah. I don't know, because Jonah was going through, and he brought that on himself, the part that we get, and it's so wild to me. One of my favorite movies that I used to show the kids is Jonah, a VeggieTales movie. Anyone who knows me knows that I will forever reference that movie. That I love it. But I remember watching it, and I was like, man, they left us on a cliffhanger a little bit. And I was like, well, let me just go back and read this, because I haven't read it in years. And I read it, and I was like, the Bible leaves us on a cliffhanger. We don't know what happens to him at the end of that. But prior to, there are still so many things that we could learn from him also. So Jonah is probably on the list. I am also probably going to look at reformatting some things. So we'll see what happens. But until next time, bye.